Hi, I'm Peter Costa, U.S. Medical Affairs Lead for Bavarian Nordic. My background and training is in public health education and epidemiology, and I've had the great honor of helping to educate people all around the world about rabies. I'm here to go over some key facts about rabies with you. We'll discuss what rabies is and how it's transmitted, as well as review rabies epidemiology in the United States and briefly cover disease development in humans. So let's go ahead and get started. If you remember nothing else from this video, take note of these key takeaways. Know that rabies is a very old viral disease of mammals, described for over 4,000 years, that is maintained in animal populations, and most often transmitted to humans through the bite of a rabid animal. Know that rabies is preventable but not curable, so this is not a condition in which we wait to see a patient walk in the door with clinical signs and symptoms of rabies. If that happens, that patient is likely going to die because when left untreated, rabies is nearly always fatal. Our goal is to prevent the onset of symptoms. Know that we can protect ourselves from rabies by vaccinating household pets, avoiding contact with stray animals and wildlife, and seeking prompt medical care if exposed, particularly if bitten or scratched by an animal. Know that if we've done all that and we're still exposed, immediate wound washing, infiltration with immune globulin, and vaccination after an exposure can prevent rabies. 3 life-saving steps anywhere in the world that can prevent rabies after an exposure. These are some news clips that I found quickly doing a Google News search, the point being that rabies is real. It's not something that only happens somewhere else around the world, but in fact, we live in a sea of rabies. And we don't have to look much further than our own backyard for wild animals and the opportunity for exposures to occur. Like that of my neighbor here taking a picture of a baby squirrel on his foot. In fact, in the US, a person is exposed to rabies every 10 minutes. Across the world, a person dies from rabies every 10 minutes. In the United States, where an estimated 55,000 people are exposed to rabies each year, wildlife actually pose the greatest risk. Here, we're most worried about the bats, raccoons, skunks, and foxes, and in fact, 93% of laboratory-confirmed rabid animals are in wildlife. In the US, we have decentralized surveillance with over 100 laboratories testing over 100,000 suspect animals every year. Thankfully, human rabies is rare, with approximately 1 to 3 cases per year. Stark reminders that rabies exists, remains one of the deadliest diseases known, and in rare cases, humans do still succumb to rabies even in industrialized nations, like the United States. So what happens when someone has a rabies exposure, does not receive treatment, and becomes infected? Well, rabies is the quintessential neurotropic disease in that it wants to move to our brain. Transmission occurs most often through a bite or scratch, but can also occur through inhalation and, when an organ donor is not suspected, through transplantation. Virus enters from the periphery, gains access to our central nervous system, replicates in our brain, and then is sent back out to nearly every innervated organ in our body, including the exit portal, the salivary gland, and then the virus can be transmitted to a new host. So our job is to intervene and keep the virus, simulated here by the red line, from ever gaining access to the central nervous system. Now, in the absence of timely post-exposure care, this chart shows the general progression of rabies symptoms in humans. The incubation period, which is the time between exposure and first symptoms, can be quite variable, documented to last from days to years. On average, though, 4 to 6 weeks. Then a very non-specific prodromal stage in which the patient may have flu-like symptoms, fever, aches, and pains. This is followed by an acute neurologic phase, which includes the hallmark symptoms of hydrophobia, aerophobia, and hallucinations like we've heard about classically throughout the ages. Shortly thereafter, the patient lapses into a coma, cardiac arrest, and with exception of a few very rare cases, death results a few days later. In this presentation, we reviewed the basics of rabies, including what rabies is and how it's transmitted, some epidemiology, disease pathogenesis, and clinical manifestation in humans. I thank you for joining us and hope that you have found this useful and informative.